This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder.
As the old saying goes, absence makes the heart grow fonder. But is that really true? Relationship coach Frank Kermit is back on the show, this time to talk about long-distance relationships. He joins us via Skype from right here in Montreal. Hi, Frank.
Hello, Peter, sir. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. Now, I got to tell you right off the bat, this is not necessarily a topic that I understand or completely sympathize with. And that's because of my own family experience. I come from a long line of people who have spent lots of time in long-term relationships that were long-distance relationships. I mean, I'm one of 5 children. I am 13 years behind the pack. And the reason why I am that far behind the pack is that my parents were separated by countries for 11 years in their marriage. So when I hear people saying, oh, I can't handle a long-distance relationship, I tend to fall on the side of my parents where they used to just go, been there, done that. What's the problem? Now, when I hear people talk about long-distance relationships, I put them into 2 groups. Long-distance relationships where the people are not necessarily committed to each other. They're, boyfriend, girlfriend. One goes off to school, say, for college at another place, and it puts a strain on the relationships. But I also, in my other category, I put people who are committed to each other, people who are married with children, who are in long-distance relationships. And I see those 2 things differently. Do you agree or disagree?
I would agree, very much so. And as a genealogist, that's a big passion of mine, researching family trees. What you described in terms of your parents having to be apart while they traveled and moved their whole family to another country. Usually, most people didn't move their whole family at once. It would be somebody going on ahead, finding work, saving up money, sending it back, and then the rest of the family would come either in parts or all together once there was enough money, and that could take years. So there is a very big difference being married and being long distance, and people who were casually dating and then having distance thrust upon them. There is another category that people come up to me with, which I then have to point out to them it may not be what they think, and that is they've never met in person. They've met online, they've met through letters, they've met through various forms of media, and they declare themselves being in a relationship without ever having really met in person. So when they come to me and say, yes, I've been in a relationship for months, and it turns out they've never met in person, I tend to be the rain on their parade in reminding them, well, if you haven't been in each other's space, your feelings are legit, okay? I'm not going to say that your feelings are not legit. You feel what it is you feel for the other person. But does that qualify it as a relationship? It may be qualified as a relationship in the way an individual will define it for themselves, but I have to take a very stern position in the profession that I'm in because I don't want to see anybody get bamboozled by a fake relationship and then end up sending money and other resources to someone they've never met. Gotcha. So although I'm very much wary of it, there are people who will classify that as a long-distance relationship as well.
Okay, so again, let's talk about long-distance relationships that work. And the reason why I bring that up is today we have more modern technology to perhaps allow that to happen. Again, I don't want to sound like the old fogey who went to school in the snow, uphill both ways and walking 5 miles. But when I describe my parents, they didn't have Snapchat. They didn't have WhatsApp. They couldn't see each other and talk to each other. My mother didn't even have a phone. For 11 years, it was nothing but letters. That's it. So it's a little easier now. Or is it?
Yes. Well, okay. Let's also bring something up here, and that is in that time, generations previous, there wasn't a lot of free time.
Yeah.
People were preoccupied with basic survival. And when you're preoccupied with survival, there is no free time to make use of where people are going to go out and do things that could be a threat to that relationship. They're too busy just trying to survive, making enough money to raise a family, especially if you're dealing with people who are separated and alone. It was very different back then. I will also go a step further and say the expectations were different back then. And by that I mean, let's say what separated a couple was war.
Right.
Someone is going off to war. Usually the males are going off to war and the women are staying behind with their families. Um, there was a certain understanding of managed expectations. Something that we'll talk about in the genealogy circles, something that we're going to talk about in wartime stories, is that when a man went off to war and he came back and found that his wife was pregnant, and if you look at the timeline, not his.
Right.
It was just accepted that, look, this is just one of those things that's going to happen. And they didn't talk about it. They just accepted the situation as is. Divorce really wasn't a thing. The same way that while the man is at war, wondering if he's going to live to see the next morning, uh, the soldiers sometimes went off with whoever they could find as their last hurrah. I don't want to get into like too many details for our
Oh,
listeners who
I
may be
can
very.
I can pretty much picture the details because again, I have members of my family who have been in both things you just described. so
Okay,
so there you go.
so
I know what you're talking about.
so the expectation was different. With today's expectations, you can stay in contact daily, seeing the person, hearing about their day, hearing their voice. And on one hand, it makes it really easy because you see the person every day. But on the other hand, it sometimes makes it more challenging because you know what it is you're missing.
Mm.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Does
You
it take
know,
a particular type of personality to succeed in this situation? And the reason why I bring that up, and I'm not one of those people who poo-poos all Hollywood relationships because people always say Hollywood relationships they're not built to last. But having said that, I'm always the optimist in situations like that. But when I hear about somebody who is getting divorced merely because either the husband or the wife is away too much working on location, I don't understand that. I don't understand that reasoning. To me, there's got to be an underlying problem that this is on top of, but they're pointing to this distance as being the problem. Am I wrong in that statement?
well, you're actually quite accurate. They will sometimes say the distance was too much, but it may not be the distance that was at the core. Now, sometimes it can be. There's two things here to look at. Number one, the person's expectations. What was that person's expectations, and were those expectations reasonable? I remember one woman I was working with in my coaching practice where she cited that the reason that she and her husband were getting a divorce was because he worked a job where he was away from home a lot, hours upon hours into his profession. And I asked her, I said, was this something that just came up or was he always into this? And she made it clear that she pursued a man who was what we would call a man of industry.
Hmm.
Well, you wanted a man who was very financially successful. But in order to be financially successful, they're going to make choices. They're going to make sacrifices. And one of those sacrifices is time because they have to put a lot of time in what they do. That's what you went after. Was it reasonable to expect that you wanted somebody who could provide you with a certain lifestyle, but also expect that they would be home for dinner every night? And that brings me to the next thing, and that is maturity. Is there a maturity level there? Because a lack of maturity equals unreasonable expectations.
Okay, well, that being said, because we just have about a minute and a half or so to wrap this up, let's use an example that I said earlier. Somebody who's going off to college, be it the male or the woman, makes no difference, or same-sex relationships, makes no difference. Somebody's going off to college, someone is not. What are the tips that you would suggest to make sure that that long-distance relationship can last?
There it is. Be mindful that the person who is leaving today, when they come back, is going to be different. If they're going off to school, long distance education, education is a period of growth. People change by being exposed to new ideas, new people, new ways of thinking. That by the time they finish their schooling and find whether it's a new career or just a new direction, they may not be the same people they were when the two of you had to separate. And you have to be mindful that people are going to grow and change in a lot of different directions. In fact, let's take that same situation and say, hey, nobody actually went away for school, but they stayed in the same city. But somebody's going to school and somebody is pursuing their path without school. There's going to be a growth. There's going to be a change. Relationships are difficult. It's hard work. And you have to have a certain type of expectation and say, look, yes, we are both open to growing. I want my partner to grow. But sometimes you have to make an effort to grow into the same direction. And that's not always possible. Now, if you can grow in the same direction, that's great. But it's not always possible. And you have to be mindful of that.
Always great advice, Frank. I thank you once again for being on the program with us. It's a special treat to have you on with us once again to talk about relationships, and this time around, long-distance relationships. Thank you very much.
All the best, sir. I'll see you in the future.
Relationship coach Frank Kermit. You can check out his website at franktalks.com. And you can go to my website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0736, and you'll find the link to his site.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.